At 8:42 Tehran time, far out in the Arabian Sea, roughly 80 nautical miles from the Iranian coastline, the silence aboard the USS Frank E. Peterson Jr. was suddenly broken. An alarm echoed through the Combat Information Center. On the screens, the ship's AN/SPY-6 radar had detected something unusual. A Shahed 139 drone was moving across the sea at low altitude, but its flight path made no sense. It was not flying in a straight line. It was weaving, shifting, and zigzagging just above the surface of the water as if it were deliberately trying to confuse the radar operators watching it. Then, without warning, the drone climbed sharply. Within moments, it rose to nearly 15,000 feet and activated its EO/IR sensors, locking its optical system toward the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier. 3 radio warnings were sent. No response. The American F-35C, callsign Anvil 1, was cleared to engage. Seconds later, an AIM-9X missile left the rail. A bright flash appeared over the Arabian Sea, and the drone vanished from the radar display. For a brief moment, officers at CENTCOM believed the incident was over. It looked like a minor provocation had been stopped before it could turn into something larger. But they were wrong, because in the same instant that drone disappeared, something far more dangerous began. The Aegis defense system suddenly filled with hundreds of false tracks. Radar screens that had been clear only seconds earlier were now overwhelmed by a storm of phantom signals. What had been a single contact became a cloud of 500 possible targets, all moving in different directions, all appearing real enough to demand attention. Before it went down, the drone had released decoys and injected hostile code into the defensive network, flooding the system with electronic noise. The fleet was no longer looking at one threat. It was now staring into a digital fog where every signal could be real and every mistake could be costly. At the same time, high above Earth, the SBIR-SGEO early warning satellite detected a massive thermal signature. 25 hidden silo doors in the Zagros Mountains had opened at the same moment. The F-35 pilot who had fired the missile realized the truth almost instantly. The drone had not been the main threat. It had been the trigger. That single engagement had activated a coordinated swarm operation unlike anything NATO intelligence had previously recorded. The question now was simple. What was coming next? Could the Fifth Fleet stabilize the situation in time? Or was the USS Abraham Lincoln about to face one of the most complex naval traps ever attempted? The next 13 minutes would change the way every commander in the region understood modern naval combat. Less than 90 seconds after the drone was intercepted, the sea around the fleet began to change. From camouflaged coastal positions near the Iranian shoreline, 20 Paken III-class fast attack craft surged into the water like arrows. But they did not rush directly toward the American ships. Instead, they moved in a chaotic zigzag formation, blending into the crowded traffic of the Strait of Hormuz. Oil tankers, fishing boats, commercial vessels, attack craft, and electronic decoys all occupied the same battle space. For the American destroyers, this created a serious problem. The AN/SPY-6 radar was one of the most advanced systems ever placed on a warship, but now it had to separate real threats from harmless civilian traffic, all while filtering through the electronic ghosts left behind by the first drone. Every second mattered, but every shot required certainty. The IRGC had turned one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth into a maze of movement, forcing American gunners to hesitate. A single wrong decision could create an international incident. Then an urgent transmission arrived from an RC-135V rivet joint electronic surveillance aircraft operating high above the region. Its SIGINT team had decoded the final data packet transmitted by the Shahed before it was intercepted. The truth became clear. The drone's optical lock on the USS Abraham Lincoln had not been random. It had captured the precise moving coordinates of the carrier, and its sudden climb to 15,000 feet had not been a panic maneuver. It had measured wind speed, humidity, air density, and atmospheric conditions at the altitude where a missile would begin its final descent. Those two pieces of information, live target coordinates and real-time atmospheric data, had been combined into a complete firing solution. That data was then sent to the guidance system of land-based Khalij Far's anti-ship ballistic missiles. These missiles could descend toward a target at extreme speed. With accurate wind and atmospheric data, their margin of error could shrink dramatically. Carrier Strike Group 3 was now trapped between 2 layers of pressure. On the surface, fast attack boats were closing in among civilian vessels. Above them, anti-ship ballistic missiles were preparing to launch with updated targeting data. If the American ships lowered their radar focus to deal with the boats, they risked missing the threat from above. But if they focused on the missiles, the small craft could slip through the defensive perimeter. It was a classic pincer movement. but upgraded for the age of drones, satellites, and electronic warfare. Do you think the American fleet could escape a trap like this? If you believe they could, comment number 1 right now. Facing a rapidly escalating situation, the 5th Fleet commander made a difficult decision. The destroyers were ordered to hold fire. Instead of using heavy weapons near commercial vessels, the fleet launched MH-60R Seahawk helicopters armed with APKWS laser-guided rockets. The helicopters moved above the formation and attacked from a steep angle, carefully selecting their targets to reduce the risk to nearby civilian ships. The rockets struck the engine sections of the fast attack craft with precision. One by one, the small vessels lost momentum, their formation collapsing before they could reach effective range. The sea lane began to clear. With the surface threat temporarily contained, the Aegis destroyers immediately shifted radar energy upward, preparing for the ballistic missile threat. But in the air, another mission was already underway. The priority was to locate the guidance network that had supported the drone. An E-2D Advanced Hawkeye Command aircraft began scanning deep into Iranian territory using UHF radar. Its crew searched for the control signals connected to the Shahed's final data transmission. After rapid triangulation, analysts identified a ground control station hidden in a remote valley near Bandar Abbas. 4 F-35Cs carrying GBU-53/B Stormbreaker glide bombs were cleared for a precision mission. Their objective was simple: cut the communication link before Iran could update missile coordinates again. The F-35s approached in stealth mode, staying at distance and avoiding unnecessary emissions. From roughly 40 miles out, the Stormbreaker bombs dropped from their internal weapons bays and began gliding toward the target. Moments later, the bombs struck radar antennas and command vehicles inside the valley. On American combat screens, the enemy signal in that area went silent. For a few seconds, it looked like the operation had succeeded. But that silence was not victory. It was a setup. As the F-35 pilots reported the target neutralized and prepared to return, warning tones suddenly filled their cockpits. A trap had just closed around them. The radar stations they had targeted were not the real command nodes. They were decoys, cheap transmitters placed there to lure the American aircraft into exposing themselves. The IRGC had waited for the moment when the F-35s opened their weapons bays. For only a few seconds, their radar profile changed. That was all the real air defense system needed. From limestone caves surrounding the valley, camouflaged hatches opened. A Bavar 373 long-range surface-to-air missile battery activated its phased array radars and locked onto the exposed formation. 4 Sayad 4B interceptors launched almost immediately, cutting through the night sky at extreme speed. For the pilots, this was one of the most dangerous situations imaginable. Being engaged at close range while still recovering from an attack run. The Black Knight squadron broke formation instantly. The pilots pulled hard maneuvers, pushing their aircraft and their bodies to the limit. Flares and chaff filled the sky behind them as they tried to break the missile lock and escape the engagement zone. Above the Gulf of Oman, the night turned into a chaotic scene of defensive countermeasures, missile trails, and rapid radio calls. For the first time that night, the United States no longer controlled the tempo, and Iran was not finished. While the fleet focused on rescuing the F-35s, dealing with the small boats, and watching for ballistic launches from land, another threat appeared from an unexpected direction. Several Panama-flagged cargo ships anchored offshore suddenly revealed hidden launch systems beneath their container covers. Inside those containers were not commercial goods. They were concealed drone launchers. Dozens of Shahed 136 one-way attack drones lifted off almost simultaneously, forming a dark wave just above the water. Flying below 10 meters, they skimmed across the sea toward the USS Abraham Lincoln. Unlike the earlier reconnaissance drone, this swarm did not require active radar guidance. It followed pre-programmed inertial and GPS coordinates, aiming for the carrier's left side approach corridor, one of the most difficult angles for the defense network to cover under pressure. The fleet had now reached target saturation. No matter how advanced Aegis was, it had to divide attention across 3 different fronts: ballistic missiles from land, fast attack craft at sea level, a drone swarm from the flank. The failing systems began rotating, searching for incoming threats, but there were too many angles and too little time. Iran had not tried to overpower one layer of American defense, it had tried to stretch every layer at once. The first drones were already approaching the outer defensive perimeter. They were only seconds from reaching the carrier's protective zone. Then, inside the Combat Direction Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, a calm order was given: cancel kinetic fire, activate silent fry protocol. For the Sayad 4B missiles chasing the F-35s, the United States could not safely launch interceptors without risking a dangerous crossfire near its own aircraft. So the commander chose another option. 2 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft cut across the formation. Their AN/AL Q-218 systems locked onto the data link between Iranian ground radar and the missile seekers. In a fraction of a second, the Growlers injected false targeting information into the channel. The effect was immediate. On Iranian radar displays, the missiles still appeared to be tracking correctly. But in reality, the interceptors had been guided toward false coordinates. All 4 Sayad-4B missiles veered off course, missing the F-35 formation and breaking apart harmlessly in the air. At the same time, the drone swarm approaching the carrier met a different kind of defense. The American destroyers did not open fire. Instead, the SLQ-32 Block 3 electronic warfare system released a high-power microwave pulse across the incoming formation. The results were sudden and dramatic. The drone's internal electronics failed almost instantly. Guidance systems went offline. Navigation chips stopped responding. One by one, the incoming drones lost stability and dropped into the sea roughly 2 nautical miles from the carrier's hull. The United States answered a physical swarm attack with directed energy and electronic warfare, turning a massive threat into scattered debris on the water. But the largest threat still remained. SBIRS issued another warning. The hatches of the Khalij-Fars ballistic missile silos in the Zagros Mountains were open. Only 3 minutes remained before another wave of anti-ship missiles could launch. The Aegis shield might stop some of them, it might even stop most of them. But at that distance, there was no guarantee it could stop them all. The only way to keep the carrier safe was to prevent the launch entirely. The problem was the launch complex itself. The missile storage site was buried nearly 50 meters beneath solid granite. Tomahawk cruise missiles would not be enough. Standard precision weapons would not reach deep enough. The only realistic option was a GBU-72 bunker-penetrating bomb. But delivering it would require an aircraft to fly dangerously close to a heavily defended mountain site protected by short-range air defenses. The fleet admiral had no safe option left. So he ordered the gamble. 2 F-35Cs that had narrowly escaped the earlier missile trap turned back toward land, even though their fuel levels were running low. They descended below 100 meters and raced into the Zagros mountain range at high speed, using the terrain itself as cover. Flying nap of the Earth, they threaded through valleys and ridgelines, staying beneath radar coverage for as long as possible. The moment Iranian observation posts detected the dark shapes moving between the mountains, short-range defenses came alive. Cannon fire and shoulder-launched missiles filled the valley. Inside the cockpits, terrain warnings sounded again and again. The pilots had almost no room to maneuver. Rock walls closed in on both sides as they pushed deeper toward the target. Their objective was not the main silo door, it was something much smaller, a 5-meter-wide concrete ventilation shaft hidden in the mountainside. The only known passage that led directly toward the underground missile storage area. Anvil 1 called in, approaching target. Maximum power. The lead F-35 suddenly pulled up from the valley floor in a sharp pop-up maneuver. For a few seconds, it exposed itself to every defensive system in the area, but the angle was necessary. At 3,000 feet, the pilot released the GBU-72. The 2.5-ton bomb dropped away, guided toward the dark opening in the mountainside. It entered the ventilation shaft and disappeared. The F-35 immediately released its remaining countermeasures and dove back toward the valley, evading 2 heat-seeking missiles that had just launched from below. 3 seconds later, the mountain shook. The bomb had penetrated deep into the ventilation network before reaching the missile storage section. The resulting internal detonation triggered a chain reaction inside the underground complex. Instead of missiles rising from their silos, columns of fire and pressure erupted back through the openings, forcing concrete fragments and smoke into the air. The site had been disabled from within. A cold voice from the MQ-9 Overwatch drone confirmed the result. Target neutralized. At sea, Iranian surface units lost their command link and began withdrawing. On the Lincoln, the all-clear signal finally sounded, but there were no celebrations. Deck crews watched as the 2 F-35Cs returned to the carrier with visible damage across their airframes. The mission had succeeded, but only by the thinnest margin. Then the damage report arrived and the mood changed again. The strike had disabled only Site A. Satellite imagery showed that Site B and Site C, located roughly 50 kilometers away, still had open bunker hatches. Mobile launchers were already moving away from fixed positions, scattering into hidden routes across the mountains. The United States had stopped the first strike and protected the carrier, but the cost was serious. In the process, it had revealed some of its most advanced electronic warfare capabilities. Iran had lost a major underground facility, but it had proven something that could not be ignored. America's no-go zone was no longer untouchable. The operation officially ended at 10:15. In Washington, senior commanders understood that this was not the end of the crisis. It was only the opening round of a new strategic era, one where drones, decoys, satellites, electronic warfare, and hypersonic weapons had rewritten the rules of naval power. And as analysts continued watching the screens, new red dots began to appear, one after another. The next wave was already moving. Its SIGINT team had decoded the final data packet transmitted by the Shahed before it was intercepted. The truth became clear. The drone's optical lock on the USS Abraham Lincoln had not been random. It had captured the precise moving coordinates of the carrier. And its sudden climb to 15,000 feet had not been a panic maneuver. It had measured wind speed, humidity, air density, and atmospheric conditions at the altitude where a missile would begin its final descent. Those two pieces of information, live target coordinates and real-time atmospheric data, had been combined into a complete firing solution. That data was then sent to the guidance system of land-based Khalij Fars anti-ship ballistic missiles. These missiles could descend toward a target at extreme speed. With accurate wind and atmospheric data, their margin of error could shrink dramatically. Carrier Strike Group 3 was now trapped between two layers of pressure. On the surface, fast attack boats were closing in among civilian vessels. Above them, anti-ship ballistic missiles were preparing to launch with updated targeting data. If the American ships lowered their radar focus to deal with the boats, they risked missing the threat from above. But if they focused on the missiles, the small craft could slip through the defensive perimeter. It was a classic pincer movement, but upgraded for the age of drones, satellites, and electronic warfare. Do you think the American fleet could escape a trap like this? If you believe they could, comment number 1 right now. Facing a rapidly escalating situation, the 5th Fleet commander made a difficult decision. The destroyers were ordered to hold fire. Instead of using heavy weapons near commercial vessels, the fleet launched MH-60R Seahawk helicopters armed with APKWS laser-guided rockets. The helicopters moved above the formation and attacked from a steep angle, carefully selecting their targets to reduce the risk to nearby civilian ships.